Jean Widner grew up contented in a stable family, but always knew she was adopted. It wasn't until adulthood that she thought about seeking out her first family. Find out more about her story and the project that came out of her desire to help others understand adoption better. This time on Adoption Uncovered. Well, hello. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and giving us an idea of how you're connected to adoption.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jean Widner. I am a domestic international, or excuse me, a domestic infant adoptee,
Mhm.
born in 1965. I have that quintessential baby scoop story. My mother was an 18-year-old unmarried young woman who was from the upper Midwest, who unfortunately, she was, I think, in an abusive home. I believe from the non-identifying information that I have from the Salvation Army, her stepfather was abusive. So I think just beyond the, typical shame of getting pregnant outside of wedlock, they needed to get her out of there because of her safety. And so she then boarded a train, went all the way to Washington State, landed in Spokane, and had me at a Salvation Army Booth Memorial Hospital, and relinquished me at about 10 days of age. And I was fostered for about 2 months and then adopted by George and Marion Kelly in 1965 and grew up in Yakima, Washington. So it was a good upbringing for the most part. My dad was a school psychologist, quoting the blank slate theory.
Oh my goodness.
Yep, because that
People
was the
don't do that
dominant
much
view.
anymore.
No, I know that was the dominant view back then.
Wow.
And my mother was a registered nurse. And, for the most part, to all outward appearances, we're the perfect quintessential little family with an adopted little girl.
As you're growing up and now you're just very active in doing research and putting your ideas together. Like what brought you to this place where you wanted to delve into studying adoption in the way that you have?
Sure. I mean, very late and very recent. And I'm going to be honest, I tripped into kind of all of it. I, growing up, I always just suppressed any sort of thought of challenging how I came to be a part of this family. I was the quintessential, also good adoptee. I just absorbed that my parents loved me, they wanted me, the chosen and special and wanted, kind of doctrine. And my parents did love me. My dad was a great dad. It would have been, I think, a real shame had he not been able to become a father. And I mean, he loved kids. He was everybody. I had the cool dad, right? He was the one who genuinely wanted to be around me and my friends, and didn't disdain us or ignore us, even when we were being the way that 13 or 14-year-old girls can be. He tolerated all of it. I mean, he was a great guy and a good father. But with all of that said, I really did buy into the whole doctrine that I was theirs and there wasn't any need to go looking for anything else. My parents always spoke very kindly toward my birth mother. They always said consistently things like, we don't know what kind of choices she would have had. She probably didn't have a lot of choices. She had to give you up, because they understood our society and they were relatively progressive thinkers for their age. But I really absorbed that in. And so I didn't look, I didn't think about looking. My parents were my parents. And by the time I did not start looking until 2020, it was, I mean, I'd done the ancestry test, a long time ago. Won't that be fun? Ha ha. There was nothing ever, anything even remotely close in the way of a match. And then all of a sudden, it was over Thanksgiving weekend and the whole world is shut down because of the pandemic. And so it's just me and my husband and my mother-in-law. And I get a notice that I have a close match in ancestry. I have a close first, second cousin match. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I go in and I look and I realize that there are actually several that I hadn't been paying attention to. And through it all, I finally looked at my husband and I said, "What do I do?" And he's like, "Honey, if you're even thinking about searching, no one here is getting any younger. Your mom would already be in her 70s. So if you're even thinking about searching, you'd better get after it." And so I did. So in the process of that, I mean, professionally, I'm an internet marketer by trade, and I also run a news and information blog in my small town. So I'm already writing. I've been, writing and creating and developing content already, and I started to really open myself up to a lot of new complexity in terms of the emotions that I was feeling about all of this. And then I read The Girls Who Went Away, which is the gateway, it seems like, for so many of us of that era. And it was one thing, of course, to know that our mothers weren't treated very well by the system back then. And it was another thing completely to come face to face with that. And when I did, I knew that I wanted to write a book, but I wanted to write a book that did what that book did, but for all sides. I felt like I wanted to hear from adoptees. I wanted to hear from birth parents, and I wanted to hear from adoptive parents. And then look at the consequences of reunion, which I myself was only just starting down the path of, and has, evolved into kind of a unfortunate, sad story in that my birth mother right now has rejected contact with me because
Mm.
the people in her life don't know. I know that she's
Wow.
married. I know that she's living in one of our mountain states in one of, in a big city in a suburb. And her husband doesn't know. So nobody around her knows. And so she's
Wow.
not willing to open up that door to contact.
And
Yeah.
by now, by this point in her life, oh my goodness, what would that mean?
Think of how frightening that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, And so I have a lot of compassion, while she's alive, there's hope.
Being adopted can be complicated, but staying with a first mother can too. Jean's experience with her first mother didn't end the way she'd hoped. It left her questioning the complicated storylines that can stem from adoption, from the path that wasn't taken.
The sum of all of that work and that research is, my book that just came out, which is called The Adoption Paradox. And it is a very paradoxical existence. I am grateful to my parents and I am glad to be their daughter. I'm glad that they are the people who raised me. And I still wonder, like, you know, our society's expectations and the way that we railroaded young women back then and the way that we're frankly still doing it to this day. We're taking resourceless women and we're insisting that they can't do this, that they can't raise their child, they can't keep their child, and that somebody else can do this better than you can. And I think that's a really horrendous thing to say to someone on a psychological and a spiritual level, to just lean into the idea of telling people what they can't do instead of trying to lift them up and encourage them to see what they can do. I mean, again, I come in, from a non-abusive home. It was a financially stable home, a loving home, an educated home. And also, though, had, let's say, my mother had kept me, we would have had probably some adversity. She would have had to figure out how to start over. She would have had to figure out how to keep me safe. What might she have learned? Because that's the thing, is she's more than just that sad story. And she deserved the opportunity to show that to herself and to the world. And there are single parents everywhere who have found something inside themselves they didn't think they had and figured it out. And I think when people watch their parents figure things out, they learn from that too. Adversity isn't always a bad thing. Now, a lack of physical safety is. That needs to, we need to be certain
Mhm.
that no child is unsafe, right? But that needs to be the measure. Everything else just needs to be worked out.
One of the topics in Jean's book is adoption history. While this may seem like an odd perspective, It serves to remind us how many of our adoption practices still resemble dysfunctional systems from not that long ago. I noticed you started out in your book with talking about a lot of adoption history. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like how you view the reason, like why do we need to tune into some of that adoption history?
Oh, yeah. I think that's a really important question. It matters because it still has a long shadow. And and that shadow still tarnishes the way that we think about adoption. And it's never been about us. It's never been about the welfare of a
Right.
child.
Nope, nope.
Sorry, it's
People
painful.
people need children.
Right. I'm sorry. It's just, it's really painful, but it's true.
Yes. Well, you
You
and
know.
also you don't vote
Mm,
as children.
mm-mm.
So you
That's
can't lobby anybody to get your needs
yeah, that's one of
addressed.
the things is it's the complete subjugation of will. And again, I will say this. I am not anti-adoption, but I am pro-truth. And so we need to tell the truth about adoption's origins and its history,
Hmm.
which, harken back all the way to the Romans, which was about wealth, moving all the way forward into, America's answer during the Industrial Revolution and all the things that were happening in our culture, which was, we too had orphanages with, hundreds and hundreds of children in them and people living on the streets. And our answer to that was the placing out program, or the orphan trains, as it's more commonly known. I think some people entered into that arrangement again with good intentions and helping a child in need. And I think others used it as a labor program,
Hmm.
unfortunately. And I think that those two things coinciding along each other as indiscernible for when that happened, the one versus the other, it again, it just speaks to it's never it's never actually been about helping someone either create a family that is a truly honest creation of that family. And it's not about the welfare of that child. It's about, I want a baby, I will get a baby, or I need labor, and it's the view of children as second class citizens. And we have no agency. Like you said, we have no agency. There's no one for us to lobby. And but you're well cared for. Okay, fine.
Hmm.
You have food, you have a roof over your head, you have safety. And so it's just assumed. And sometimes love, sometimes we have to play second class in that arrangement and just be grateful.
Jean has heartfelt messages for both adoptees and first parents in her book.
For adoptees, I think what I hope for is to know that you're not alone. Again, our views are as vast as the stars. So are our experiences. We're from every side of the spectrum. One side of the spectrum being adoption is awesome. There's nothing wrong here. To the other side of the spectrum being adoption is horrible. It needs to go away. And the overwhelming majority of us are somewhere in between. It's not an on off switch. It's like, remember the old fashioned dimmer switches, where you turn the dial. That's kind of how we are, except then extrapolate that by 5 million of us.
Hmm.
I think the biggest takeaway that I want to say to any adoptees is speak. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and don't apologize, and understand that whatever your story is, you're not alone. And to just very quietly be willing to say, I've always felt like this and this and this, but I've never really known how to acknowledge these other things that have always perked beneath the surface, but I didn't know what to do with. And there are so many adoptees that I find it's so interesting where, you'll have a family that's built by adoption. You'll have two or three siblings who aren't related to each other, who were all adopted, but they'll have never talked about adoption in their whole life. I think that's crazy. And I mean, again, that's I think more so from, my era than maybe the current one. At least I hope so. But I mean, if you have, several kids in your family that are adopted and they're not comfortable talking about adoption, that alone is a warning signal,
Hmm.
that you're going to have some disenfranchised feelings there that just haven't been given a safe space to be expressed.
Hmm.
Um, so that's, I think, the big takeaway there for birth parents, my God, to the prior generation, you did your best, you know. Um,
Yeah.
you did your best. That's all that I mean, there just isn't anything else to say there. I think you have a lot of really traumatized people. And again, we do tend to adoptees, I think, often romance our
Hmm.
first parents. There's some stories that I've heard where a few adoptees have taken a look at their birth mother or birth father and said, "Ooh, I dodged a bullet there," and that's okay. You know,
Yeah.
it's okay to
Well,
feel that way and acknowledge that.
and that's a good resource for those people to have is if
Exactly.
is you know if that's their and I think that's one of our issues is making sure those are the people connected and not the people that you're talking about that could use a few more $1,000.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
A relinquishment needs to be necessary. This is not trivial. And
Hmm.
that I think needs to be the single biggest takeaway and the biggest wake up that this is a tool. It can be used for good or ill. And I'm not entirely certain that we're really checking the box on good. I'm
Hmm.
really not sure that we are. I think we're failing a lot of people in the process. And I think we're failing birth parents who deserve the opportunity to keep their child, who want to keep their child. I interviewed birth mothers who were literally telling everyone and their brother around them, saying, "I want to keep my baby. I want to keep my baby. I just need a little bit of help. Can you please help me?" And we're still railroaded into relinquishing their child. And I think that that is a horrendous set of circumstances. And I don't care what's causing that. That's wrong. I'm just going to call it that.
Right.
Wrong.
Mhm.
So, we need to do a better job of really identifying what necessary looks like.
Right. And I feel like that is something that really has been slow in getting updated.
It
And
has.
I think we need to hear kind of like what you're talking about. We need to hear from those parents and what their experience is, just like adoptees. Like, I feel like really just in the present is when we're starting to hear these people, since it really wasn't that long ago when there was so much shame and secrecy. For years, the role of adoptive parent seemed to resemble a one-time interaction that allowed them the opportunity to parent. Jean brings to light how much more support and training adoptive parents need, not only for their sake, but for the adoptees as well.
One of the other statistics that, again, just kind of really caught me flat footed was something that my researchers and I actually had to kind of put together. And I need a shout out right now to Sadie and Zen, my two UNLV students who I hired, for a year and a half as we went through all of this stuff. As we started going through some of the statistics, and I started to say, okay, what is the rest of the world doing? And what we learned is the rest of the world is not adopting in the way that we do or at the rate that we do. We are literally the world's outliers. Uh,
Hmm.
and again, I think some of that is because of this online marketplace that we have created for adoption, which again, I believe that, adoptive parents did not create this. They have been in the past, I think, maybe beneficiaries of it, but they did not create it. And I think a great many of them feel used and abused also by the system. Like, why should an adoption be costing $75,000? Why? Why? That's ridiculous. There are legitimate costs, a home study costs some money. It
Yep.
costs money to legally have a child processed through the system. Again, when that's necessary, I can support that, but I can't support just relentless financial gouging. I cannot support this for-profit motive that manipulates people, that literally moves women across state lines into more favorable states. The current tax credit for an adoption is
Mhm.
$15,900.
As I was growing up, it was always said, like, oh, well, if you can't have kids, you can always adopt.
Sure.
And I think just that statement right there
Hmm.
is just such a fundamental misunderstanding because parents need to go into adoption with the idea that no, we're going into this new area where we are going to have to invest time, energy, money. It's something else entirely. It's not just like
It's not the same.
it's not charity. It's not like, oh, this poor kid, I'm gonna fix them. It's also not for you to fill your household. It's complicated and you need to be ready for that.
Hmm.
And hopefully as we hear more stories, as more of this comes out, people will understand that it's nuanced, it's complicated.
Right. And it isn't just um, a de facto response to infertility. Oh, you can just adopt.
Mm-hmm.
It, which is how we viewed it. And again, that's not a small shift. That is a big paradigm shift, and culturally one that people are going to fight against, because we live in the society that we live in and people want what they want. That's something that we need to be mindful of and caution against too. And I think that facilitators need to be aware of that too, adoption facilitators and trainers, and again, the folks who are out there who are really trying to prep hopeful adoptive parents into, like, listen, this is different. Um, because I don't think a self-centered approach toward adoption ends up serving the adoptee.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes, again, a much more holistic and a much more broad and circumspect view to truly understand the impacts. And if someone is in an emotional state, I mean, none of us make good decisions when we're overwhelmed by emotions. That's We're literally hardwired that way as human beings. If we're under stress, then a different part of our nervous system is in charge of our decision-making faculties. That's that's the way we're designed. So if you have a person who is under an emotional disenfranchised grief or something like that, then they're not going to make good decisions from a good place. And these decisions are forever and they impact another human being, several other human beings.
Getting information about first family can be difficult. One of the big reasons stems from the idea that first family should be given privacy and their information hidden from the adoptee and their family once the adoption is finalized. This is a flawed idea, and Jean believes we need to do more to help adoptees access this information when they're ready.
I was having dinner with an adoptive parent and therapist who is an amazing woman one night at a conference, and one of the issues that we talk about a lot is our birth certificates and the way that adoptee birth certificates are treated. How, in 1917, when Minnesota did what they did and created this law that became a template for a lot of other states, it became one of the first ones where they redo our birth certificate completely because, of course, I'm a bastard. I cannot therefore be acknowledged as a bastard. For heaven's sakes, I need to be saved from that plight of being a bastard. So we need to legitimize me by being a part of a married couple family. So my parentage, my actual parentage, needs to be erased. And then we need to seal that document because, of course, needing to adopt is an incredibly shameful thing. We still do this way 100 flipping years later, which is the stupidest freaking thing ever. And where it gets really dangerous is that we still do this in foster care. So you have a kid who's 7, 8, 10, 12 years old who knows damn well he has siblings out there, you know, who
Mm-hmm.
knows that there are other people that and they get separated forever by this because our state systems don't talk to each other. And somebody's name has been changed, and then the document is sealed. This is stupid beyond all comprehension, and yet that's what we do. So back to where I started, which is I'm having, dinner with my friend, and she says, I don't understand why we can't just create a certificate of parentage.
Genius.
Duh. I was like, ding, 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 ding. Thank you. Most brilliant
Yeah.
idea ever. Why are we even messing with anyone's, birth certificate? And
Hmm.
I thought, let's just, why don't, why can't my birth certificate grow? Right?
Right.
Like literally, like just, add on to my
Hmm.
file of existence as a human being. But why do we need to seal anything and why do we need to erase it? There are genuine moments, genuine real times when you have, a surrender. Rich Erlab, who is a wonderful activist in Colorado, who I quote in my book, he was in my interview, he was talking about you had a situation where you had a safe haven relinquishment of a young woman who was terribly afraid because she was Islamic in terms of her religion. Of course, she's had a child, she's unmarried. This is a no-go, and she
Hmm.
would lose her life, right? So that's a very real, very serious situation where her identity actually does need to be protected. So let's
Right.
understand the necessity for that and create a system to do that when it is absolutely necessary, when anonymity
Hmm.
does mean a person's life. Let's figure out how to handle that, which I think we can, and understand that it really is just that rare. It is very,
Yeah.
very rare. We have to remember, like, for example, in Ohio, when I interviewed Betsy Norris, who was the activist who opened the records up in Ohio, there was one caveat. Um, there was a 1 year period where any birth parent who wanted to remain anonymous could go check in with the state. They did have to provide a full medical history, but they could ask to remain anonymous. Of the 400,000 birth records that there were, 223 birth parents stepped forward to say, I want to stay anonymous.
Yeah.
So those are the stats that we're talking about for
Hmm.
how rare this really is.
Yeah.
And let's let that see the light of day as
Mhm.
well.
Every adoption journey is unique. One of the big ideas that was driven home for Jean over the course of her project was the need for more open-mindedness and flexibility to allow space for everyone's experience of adoption.
I mean, the single biggest takeaway, I think, is assume nothing.
Hmm.
Uh, make no assumptions about what you think is going to happen, about how you think your family or your child is going to evolve. Make no assumptions about anything. And I think people spend a lot of time unlearning as opposed to learning, right? They
Okay.
have to spend a lot of time really unlearning expectations. And the single biggest things are listen to your adopted child, and then don't make your adopted child have to do all of the emotional heavy lifting in the relationship. Even in my household growing up, my parents were not shy about talking about the topic, and it was not a shameful thing because, like I said, they did not come to my adoption through what you would call quintessential fertility grief. My dad was sterile. He knew he was sterile. And so they weren't going to be able to have children naturally. They knew that. They went to an adoption agency, boom. So there wasn't shame. But I will say I was the one who generally had to bring it up. It's a fine line as a parent. I'm sure you know this. It's like, oh my God, do we have to freaking talk about that again? Because
Oh, yeah.
your kids don't want to hear it all the time. They're like,
Uh-huh.
but there are so many different perceptions in the way, families are. Oh, we talk about adoption all the time. No, we don't. Yes, we do. No, we don't. It's somehow finding that groove in the middle where you are able to and really know your kid and really parent from a very open and aware and connected space, to where you can pick up when something's wrong. You can pick up when maybe they're pondering something. And I think it's so important to say your kids don't have the words, right? I'm 8. How can you possibly expect me to have a vocabulary that's going to be able to share with you, I'm feeling really weird about why my mom didn't want me, or I'm feeling really weird about why, you know, maybe you're in an open relationship and maybe things are rocky. It's like, don't make your kid do the heavy lifting, you know, um, and keep trying to keep those doors open for communication, and then step through it yourself, and be willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that kind of speaks to how you were saying about how for so long it was always seen where adoptive parents, you get the kid in, okay, it's just another kid. No,
You're done.
like when you cross that threshold of you have now adopted, it's a whole nother thing. And it's a whole nother thing that you need to educate yourself about.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to take responsibility because, like, all these things you're saying about, they're really nuanced. They're very, and they all rely on that the parents have an education that their agency is not
Yeah.
giving them. Now, agencies do give some.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through foster care training and I've been through a lot of different trainings. But wow, yeah, your piece about not coming with assumptions. There's a lot of information that like you and I have talked about isn't real solid. It's not like it's even necessarily in a book. It's stuff that we like I think you and I have kind of learned from interacting with people, from interacting with people in the community. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you see your book as something that helps with that situation
I
or
hope so. I hope so. I mean, here's the thing. We say this all the time in adoption land. You know this. There is no one adoption story, right? There's no one adoptive parent story. There's no one birth parent story. There's no one adoptee story. There's your story and your family. And the biggest thing that I would say to a hopeful adoptive parent or a newly adoptive parent is you just did a thing, okay? And you need to be prepared, I hope, on the front end to show up in ways that are going to require maybe something different from you than what you just thought. This is not just bring the baby home and everything is going to be fine. And again, it's that fine, nuanced line because you don't want to pre-pathologize to the point where you become the hovercraft parent and then your kid doesn't get to grow in just normal ways, and also be ready to play catch. You have to be willing to show up for that level of the journey. Otherwise, please think, think longer and harder before doing this.
there are too many misconceptions about adoption and the people touched by it. Jean's desire is to help dispel these and educate people about adoption reality. Find more information about Jean and her book at my website, adoptionuncovered.com. And thank you.